Today I'm gonna talk at you about non-human people. No, not intelligent apes or wisecracking robots. I'm talking about the legal definitions of artificial people. I'm talking about corporations.
Yes, we could raise taxes on people.
That's corporations!
Corporations are people, my friend. Yes, we could raise taxes on people. That's not the way. Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes on. Of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes? What? Whose pockets? Whose pockets? People. The banks aren't bad people.
I'm gonna explain to you the history of business corruption. Back in the Middle Ages, kings ruled over dukes, who ruled over barons, who ruled over peasants in an economic system called feudalism. Feudalism is an extremely right-wing authoritarian system that enforces class privilege based on land ownership and maximizing the productivity of owned land. It's actually a reasonable system when land is the limiting economic factor and the world is politically unstable, because when wars are waged and bloody coups take place, kings and lords can be replaced without harming the peasants or the economic integrity of the nation, and each fiefdom can operate independently of any other. In the cities of the feudal kingdoms, they used a second economic system called mercantilism, in which the market was controlled by guilds. A guild is like a combination of a labor union and a corporation. Each guild controlled the resources, the means of production, the labor force, the legal rights to conduct business, and the prices of its particular craft. There was a guild for each major industry. There were grocer guilds, metalwork guilds, shipbuilding guilds, and so forth. The guilds were extremely corrupt by modern standards. Each guild ran a monopoly. They kept the supply of finished goods low and kept prices high to maximize profits. This slowed the economy way down and kept common people poor. Guilds used violence and criminal actions to halt or incorporate any competition. Guilds had so much influence that they often got to write their own laws to secure their positions of power. Nations followed the same policies when it came to trade. They thought that when they sold goods to another country for gold, that they were becoming wealthier. and when they purchased goods from another country for gold, that they were becoming poorer. So international trade came to a near standstill, which encouraged the endless wars over land and gold reserves. This continued on until the early modern period. Philosophers in France, America, and Scotland devised the premise of a free economy and a free society, which had a profound impact on both the French and Americans who supported each other's revolutions. The French got to name the restrictionless market, and they called it
laissez-faire.
to tick off us English types. This new market was introduced gradually, so the same elite families that ran the old guilds could transition to running the corporations. In this new system, the economic elite were nicknamed Fat Cats. For the better part of 200 years, the industrial West experimented with the
Laissez-faire.
market. According to the theory on paper, eventually prices of goods would go down and wages would go up. But this is not what happened in reality. In practice, businesses are very quick to raise prices and very slow to lower them, and very quick to lower wages and very slow to raise them. And when the working poor have very little money, instead of selling cheap goods to them, it is more profitable for businesses to instead market expensive goods to those who still have money. The quality of life for the majority of people had not much increased from where it was back in the Middle Ages. In some ways, it was even worse. This new free market was riddled with so much corruption that it inspired many independent revolutions designed to correct its flaws. The communist revolution that created the Soviet Union, the fascist revolutions in Spain, Italy, and Germany, the labor rights revolution that took place in Britain and America, anarchism was also popular, but they didn't found a new society. Now, the labor rights revolution turned out to be the really good one. It directly solved all the problems with the laissez-faire market without overturning the benefits. We did away with child labor, enforced equal pay for equal work, introduced minimum wage, and stopped businesses from threatening and abusing their employees. By instituting these policies as law, it replaced the need for ham-fisted unions. By paying workers more than a subsistence wage, the people suddenly had money to spend on themselves, and this created a consumer economy, in which businesses compete to serve the public. The standard of living in the West skyrocketed to heights never before seen by man. The free West entered a golden age greater than any other. We are actually in the least corrupt time in history. The fact that it looks so corrupt and shitty is simply because of how sophisticated the common man has become. We can see the corruption in business now, and we have the right to call it out and get pissed off about it. Many of those same elite families who ruled in ages past are still the elites of today, and they can go fuck themselves. Now, one of the things that the communists did right was murder all the elites. It was pretty cool. It didn't stop corruption in their nation, but it was very satisfying. The big problem with communism is that on paper, it's supposed to work out just fine, but in practice it does not compensate for human error like a free market does. The communist economy is governed by economic bureaucrats who decide all the prices, all the wages, and the distribution of goods. When they make a mistake, the economy wastes thousands of man-hours, or people starve to death, and the bureaucrats are not held accountable and have no oversight. They just say, "Oopsie," and have anyone who threatens them disappeared out to a slave labor camp. Now, in modern times, we have a lot of shitty bullshit laws and shitty-ass lawyers suing people and shit. Most of what a lawyer does is speak the language of legalese, which uses common words with different meanings to bewilder and fast-talk people. For example, saying sorry For offending someone is the same as admitting legal guilt, and you can be held legally accountable for this even though you were just trying to be polite or offer condolences. Most of what a lawyer does is translate and abuse the arcane and cryptic legal codes hidden within old dusty tomes. They use terms like persons to refer to humans and corporations together. We plan to help taxpayers, they say, even though they don't specify which taxpayers that they're helping. If everyone was reasonable and moral, we wouldn't need laws or government at all. But some people are assholes. Lawyers don't make anything, they don't contribute to society, they slow down business, they consume tremendous amounts of resources. Lawyers as an institution only exist because people are assholes, and no one needs more lawyers than corporations. Corporations can make money and defeat their competitors through the act of suing alone. Most corporations have massive legal departments for this reason. Now, the supposed reason that corporations are legally people is to protect the property rights of the shareholders while still allowing the corporations to exist as an independent entity. Shareholders can buy and sell shares, die of old age, and so forth without affecting the integrity of the corporation. And any laws that infringe on the rights of the corporation also infringe on the human rights of the shareholders. So the logical solution is to declare that corporations are people. This argument is obviously bullshit. But lawyers have invented ways to legally lie and cheat and abuse the language to trick the elderly boomer judges and politicians. They're going well out of their way to cling to this personhood narrative. Making corporations people is primarily for the purpose of shifting legal responsibility away from the shareholders and the employees of the corporation itself. It allows corporations to sue and to be sued without threatening the shareholders. When a corporation does well, it pays dividends to the shareholders. But when it does poorly and goes bankrupt, those debts belong only to the corporation itself. This makes it easy for investors to focus on trading stocks without having to worry about minor issues like morality or personal responsibility. Corporations have just enough human rights to be a patsy. The economy of the modern mega-corporation has everything wrong with it that communism does. Just like the corrupt economic bureaucrats of the Soviet Union, corporations have no oversight and are not held accountable for the problems that they cause. Hundreds of small competitive businesses have been replaced by one mega-corporation that decides all the prices, all the wages, and the distribution of goods. When the corporation makes mistakes, they're wasting millions of man-hours, and people lose their homes, but the corporation doesn't go out of business when it fails. They get bailed out instead. And instead of having dissenters taken to slave camps, they just sue them into submission and enslave them with debt. You might say, "But Confederate Cat, I don't want to be held responsible for any crimes committed by corporations that I buy stocks in." Well, you should be. If everyone had to be held accountable for the crimes of the businesses that they own, there would be a hell of a lot less crime and corruption. When you buy stocks in a company, you are paying them to keep doing what they're already doing. That's on you. Some of y'all might be wondering about my politics. Am I conservative? Am I liberal? No! Fuck politics. Fuck both sides. The right side and the left side is not both sides of an issue. The Republican agenda plus the Democrat agenda does not constitute the entirety of all truth in the universe. Instead of a right and a left, how about a little south? I think it's time to bring a touch of Southern wisdom up to Washington. Not only can I justify my use of the Confederate flag, I'm going to sell you on it. You're about to get splashed with a boiling hot mug of truth. The American flag is offensive to America's enemies, same as how the Confederate flag is offensive to the enemies of the Confederacy. Is the American flag a hate crime because it is offensive to the Vietnamese? The American flag represents oppression and death to Native Americans. But to give up on the flag means to give up on the history of American culture and the good intentions and progress that goes along with it. The Confederate flag doesn't represent a history of slavery any more than the American flag does, but people wave that shit rag around all the time without a worry. The real reason that the media and the elites are against the Confederate flag is because it undermines their authority. The Confederate flag is the flag of the South, and of Dixieland and the Dixieland culture, and of the will to stand up to the government. The Confederacy has no government and no politicians, and so it cannot be corrupt. America has a government, and it is ruled by Illuminati vampires. The Confederacy charges no taxes. America charges a lot of taxes. The Confederacy has and needs no military. America is constantly committing war crimes and crimes against humanity with its military. The Confederacy does not oppress anyone. America oppresses everyone. Which nation would you rather be a part of? But what about that reputation for racism and being uncultured, you might ask? Oh, that's a media conspiracy? The Confederate flag is associated with the racist image of the negative white stereotype of an unsophisticated racist. It is an act of racist bigotry to conflate a people with a racial stereotype. But nobody cares about the racial identity of white boys. In fact, because of this stereotype and how it is abused by the media, white folks can't even talk about racism without being portrayed as racist hypocrites. You might say, well, if I lived in a society that used slavery, I would stand up against it. Oh, you think it's that easy? After the American Civil War, the United States stopped using slavery, right? Wrong! Ding, 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 wrong! They just stopped using slaves within the United States. All we did was export our slave needs to other countries. Instead of calling different colored people subhuman, we started calling them sub-citizens instead. Slavery is alive and well, my friend. There are more slaves today than there ever were in history. Who do you think makes all that cheap crap you buy at Walmart? Who makes your clothes? Who made the cloth? Who picked the cotton? That's right, slaves. But they're not always called slaves in a legal context. Lawyers would rather use terms like forced labor, or sweatshops, or prison labor, or indentured workers, or unregulated employees. Corporations help write the laws in other countries too, bribing politicians to allow all sorts of unethical practices, and they use strange wording that flies under the radar of international regulators. When you buy a cheap-ass shoe at a megastore, that transfer of your money to the manufacturer of the shoe means that you are indirectly hiring those people to make that shoe. You are hiring slavers to kidnap people and use slave labor, and for all of the abuses that go along with this institution. You are not held accountable for those crimes, but you should be. It's corporate law that allows this to happen in the first place, and corporate law that keeps it separate from you. In first world countries, we have banned child labor. This might be the single most important labor right. Every country that has banned child labor and enforces this law is a first world country. Every country that has child labor is a third world country. That's the difference this makes. It's because children get paid less than half the normal wage. They can't stand up for themselves, don't know their rights, and employers can physically and sexually abuse them and get away with it. Child labor countries employ mostly children and fire the adults and hire children instead. So people in these countries have to have umpteen children to support the family, and everyone has to live in sea cans because no one can afford to build a house. Prostitution is a way of life for young girls, and many children are sold or kidnapped into slavery on a regular basis. It was the same way in this country until about 100 years ago. And our corporate masters say that this is a good thing because at least now those poor children have a job and earn some money instead of being jobless and having no money. If you took child labor away, those children would starve. This argument is taught in schools and in universities as part of an advanced economic education, and it's bullshit. Most third world countries are net food exporters, and yet the people there are starving, not because of a food shortage, but because the local people get paid so little that they can't afford to buy their own food when it's priced for an international market. They are worked to death and left to rot on the ground so that corporations can save an extra dollar. We could have a planet of first world countries in 20 years if we stopped unethical business practices and defund child labor. But that's not going to happen because it's kept secret from us, and because corporations are not held accountable for these crimes. Do you know who is held accountable for these crimes? No one. There is rampant slavery, and the laws are just vague enough that no one is ever going to be punished. But don't worry, corporations are trying to find industry-wide solutions to child labor issues. Not to end slavery, but to end the issues that slavery inflicts on them. The only people that are outspoken about how corporations are people, or that money is speech, are the spokesfolks of corporations who have money to spend on politics. Money enables speech, they say, because limiting money spent on speech infringes on the freedom of speech. But we could solve this corporate speech issue completely and get corporate money out of politics in one fell swoop, just by declaring that corporations are not people and thus do not have freedom of speech. Freedom of speech seems to matter quite a bit, unless you have no money. The homeless have no advocate, and no one cares what they have to say. I guess money is all of your rights. Money is justice, too. We could solve most of the world's problems by making corporations illegal and ending all forms of business shareholding. I would go so far as to say that anyone who holds political office should lose a bunch of their rights as well. Politicians haven't done much to prove that they're people. Mitt Romney thinks that corporations are people because they feel all of the same emotions that he does. For one thing, businesses and anyone holding political office should not have the right to privacy or the right to plead the Fifth Amendment. Most politicians are already on corporate payrolls and allow corporations to write bills and laws for them. Both the left and the right go on and on about how regulations are stifling businesses, and we need to end these needless regulations, or cut the red tape, or give taxpayers more economic opportunities. Do you know what a regulation is? It's a law. A law like how slavery is illegal. And you know what regulations they want to overturn? That's right, labor rights. And they're getting their way, real slowly, real painfully.
House Joint Resolution 37 rolls back the so-called blacklisting rule. When I met with manufacturers earlier this year, and they were having a hard time, believe me, they said this blacklisting rule was one of the greatest threats to growing American business and hiring more American workers. It was a disaster, they said. This rule made it too easy for trial lawyers to get rich by going after American companies and American workers who contract with the federal government, making it very difficult. You all know what I'm talking about, right? Yes, does everybody agree?
What we need is to cultivate an economy with a large number of small businesses all competing with each other for the public benefit, not an economy with a small number of huge businesses for which the public must compete to get hired by. If corporations are people, they are horrifying, emotionless, and faceless people that seek the enslavement of mankind. They are utterly evil and have been the bane of humanity since the beginning of society. Jesus drank himself into an angry rage and tried to fight them. The elites would throw us back into the Middle Ages in a second if they got their way. You would be their literal slave instead of just their figurative slave. This is their last chance to enslave the world. We're all becoming wise to their shit, and they know it. So now they're getting sloppy and desperate, like your mom. You can see it in the news. They're obviously going to try to instate martial law and keep the virus lockdown going forever as a way to keep us policed and afraid. The totalitarian state will be named democracy. Your slavery will be named the free market. Your overlords and oppressors will be named the public. Your mandatory false god will be named success. And the tyrannical spying and probing into your daily life will be called social media. This story is either going to end as a tragedy or a comedy, and I'm going to laugh and go down shooting either way.